L-C-I-T-Y. That's all we need.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tigers Down Under. I'm your host Alex, and with me I have Dan. How are you, Dan? In all senses of the word.
Yeah, look, I'm all right. A little bit under the weather. Yeah, and then just a very emotional mix, I suppose, in terms of City and the end of the season and the beginning of the postseason has been a bit of a whirlwind so far.
We'll talk the Plymouth game first to get that out of the way, but just addressing the elephant in the room in the title of the podcast with Rosenior. And as you say, I mean, a couple of days ago in our podcast chat, saying to you guys, we'll do our full season review next week, and then we'll clock off for a couple of months. It'll be nice and cruisy, not much to think about for a little while with City, transfer window in maybe a month's time. But until then, not much to think about. Put out feedback sort of thing. I was on there's a Tiger Base website which does sort of all the stats for players' appearances and managerial appearances and stuff like that. And I was literally scrolling through there going, Rosenior's managed the same number of games as Nigel Adkins, and after next season, after a full season of management, he'll almost have managed as many games as Grant McCann. That's interesting. Like, he's really getting up there. And literally flicked over to Twitter and saw the news. So to talk about shock. It was absolutely shocking, but we'll get into that in a second. We'll talk Plymouth very quickly because I don't think there's too much to talk about with the Plymouth game, which maybe feeds into the news. I don't know. But obviously disappointing end to the season on the pitch, where I suppose in a way it was good that it was taken out of our hands with West Brom winning so comprehensively against Preston 3-0. It didn't feel as if we'd, done it ourselves. It's not as if West Brom lost and we still lost and therefore cost ourselves a place in the playoffs, but still a disappointing game.
Yeah, very, very frustrating watch. I think especially after the game against Ipswich, the 3-3 where we went toe to toe and we sort of, it was like that was a game where two good teams looked like they could sort of score at will, and then we turned up at Plymouth in a game that we had to win if we wanted to keep any chance of playoffs alive. And we seemed very gun shy suddenly, which was a little bit frustrating, or I guess very frustrating. And I guess like it's very easy for many people to, I guess, criticize the performance of our players and the tactics of the manager and all that sort of stuff. And that, to an extent, I think they're worthy of that. But also, I think, credit to Plymouth, who were, they needed that win, to stay in the championship. And, so I think they really came out and they played, a really good game against us. And
I think that's really what counted against
the desperation that they, if they didn't win, they were done. So,
and I think that's it.
We kind of weren't quite, we didn't quite have the same sort of level of desperation. We weren't quite in the same level of dire straits. I think maybe it's a little bit different if we were
sixth, and then
and it's like we have to win this. If we win this, we guarantee playoffs or something. I think maybe that little bit of extra motivation changes things a little bit, but certainly it was pretty dour from us. But I think credit to Plymouth, they nabbed a goal and then they sort of just sort of sank deeper and deeper and deeper, but defended their little hearts out, and snuck, or not necessarily snuck away, but got a 1-0 victory over us and earned their another season in the championship. So I guess kudos to them.
Yeah, and I think that's it. It's a frustrating thing that all the results were going against us in the sense that Plymouth really did need the win. It's not as if Norwich were winning and Plymouth were comfortably safe. I think probably one of the more ironic things out of this game, given the news and the criticisms around Rosenior in some respects of playing Allsop, for example, is the way that Allsop was probably one of our men of the match in keeping us in this game in different points when we were 0-0 even. Plymouth getting through on goal and him pulling out some terrific saves, which, I mean, was very surprising to me because I keep hearing and reading that Allsop is unable to make a save. He's just there for his footwork. So some of those saves were terrific and really kept us in the game. But I thought Seri in midfield was really good. The one I'd love to get your opinion on as well was Carvalho, because it was interesting. I mean, I've heard really conflicting sort of assessments of his game. I actually thought from the start he was one of the few really looking to try something. He was trying to get into space. He went down easily a few times, but even then it felt like he was doing that to try and help the team. He seemed to actually be really caring. Whereas other people have sort of said, oh, he had a really poor game. The Loneys didn't really put a foot in and were quite poor. So what was your take on Carvalho's game?
I don't know. I don't necessarily think that any of the Loneys or any of the players had a terrible game. I think there was as much as I said that Plymouth sort of effort and desire was just greater than ours. I don't think that necessarily means that there was no effort or desire from our players. I think mostly, there was effort and endeavor without. It was just, I guess no real end product, because I really felt like as I've seen the same criticisms of the lone players, and I think it's just that's an easy cop-out excuse when you lose a game like that, and those players are going back to their clubs now, just to say, well, they knew we weren't making playoffs, so they didn't put their hand up and didn't try. But I really find that a very insulting attitude to take, towards those players who, like, Carvalho has been sensational for us since he came, and to then just decide and criticize and say he didn't try after what 8 goals or something in the
nine goals, I think,
in the half season that he was there, to criticize his effort and stuff just seems ridiculous
revisionist.
to me. Not that you can't, not that a player couldn't have a bad game or couldn't be off, and that I'm sure it's entirely possible for Carvalho to have a game where he doesn't put a lot of effort in, but I just don't necessarily think it's not how I saw the game anyway. It felt like, I guess, like many games where we've been disappointed with the win, with the result, sorry, where we have tried stuff and there's been endeavor, but no end product, and the bounce of the ball has been against us a little bit, is kind of how it felt. It sort of felt like one of those games where sort of every 50-50 ball that bounced out was sort of falling to Plymouth. But yeah, I don't necessarily think that, because I actually, I thought Delap was getting himself about reasonably decently in the first half, and I was a bit surprised that he got subbed off. But I've seen plenty of commentary that says that he was useless in that first half against Plymouth, and going down too easily and not doing, this or that or whatever. And I don't know.
I think there's a desperation sometimes, like you say, like we lost the game, and I think there's a desperation to explain it or justify it by blaming the play. Like, absolutely. I mean, you can't say that the players played well, given that we didn't win the game, but you also don't have to say that the players didn't put effort in or didn't care to justify or to explain why we lost. Because, for example, Matty Jacob, I mean, I think he's had a terrific season in the context of where he's come from, but for the second or third time, he's beaten at the post for a header, which cost us a soft goal. Should be doing better, I would argue, but you don't see the same criticisms for him because, dare I say it, he's a Hull lad, he's a local lad, he's a permanent player, he's an academy player. It's an easier target to go after the loanees or I mean, look, to be fair, I think because Allsop had such a good game that he didn't get any of the blame this time. But I could have easily, like, if he hadn't pulled out a couple of those better saves, you say, oh, he should have saved that header sort of thing. But Jacob, for that goal, is probably the one at fault there. Yeah, as Stephen says, showing his inexperience.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair assessment. I think, as much as Matty Jacob has had a really good spell since he sort of broke into that first team. I think he certainly does show inexperience at times. There's certainly, I mean, we've praised his, his heart and his dedication and his commitment at times with some tackles over the last few weeks, but certainly I think defensively on like set plays and things sort of particularly, there's some inexperience. And I think still, I guess it's not necessarily physicality, although he is still quite a small lad or lean. That I think just sort of that positioning on and knowing how to, I guess, counteract that, the bigger body who's going to come and leap over the top of you, how you sort of position yourself, maybe a little bit deeper, a little bit further back to sort of stop that from happening. But I think just while that was frustrating, I overall I kind of just think that too many people are looking at this game unnecessarily critically. I think there's the disappointment that we didn't, I think there's a few factors into why everyone's so angsty about the end of the season. We were in the top 6 for a long stretch of the season, up to sort of around Christmas time, and then we sort of tailed off and fell out, and we did well to sort of recover to get close enough. But even in that, I think, that there wasn't a lot of wins in that last sort of section of the season, where realistically a couple of those games were very winnable, which we didn't manage to do, and we made it hard for ourselves anyway. We could have and should have easily been probably in the playoffs anyway. And so I think there's a little bit of that where you go, well, we were in the position and we let it slip, and then we almost regained it, but we didn't quite. And then just I think people are just really disappointed with how the season ended up, and I think as well with how well the season went as a whole, that people got their hopes up a little bit more than they expected to. I think most of us were, expecting sort of that mid-table finish, and then to finish just outside the playoffs and to have missed out by a whisker. That run-in had people excited with so many opportunities to close that gap. And I think it's that emotional hangover, which I think I was talking about when we were talking about the Coventry game, the emotional hangover, when you ride those emotions for so long that there's always a crash. And I think, Plymouth was the crash for a lot of the supporters. And
a lot of the supporters, and also a certain chairman, I suspect, who pre-season was quite happy to finish 10th in the table. But that obviously changed in January. But look, we're sort of getting into the broader reflection on it. So let's quickly whip through our MVPs for this, and we'll talk about the big piece of news where we can probably talk a bit more about that broader discussion. I gave Allsop the 3 votes for this one. I thought he was probably the standout player in the game with his saves early on, and really stood sort of head and shoulders above the others. I thought Greaves, I guess, was probably another one who was really impressive in defence, was closing them down a lot and trying to get forward when he could, and Seri in midfield. But it was, it was a pretty slim pickings of options, I thought, for this one.
I went fairly similarly. I went Greaves for 3, Allsop for 2, and I went Omer for the 1 because I thought he had again, brought some positivity, some energy on the ball. Tried to get involved when he came on sort of at half time. So that was my that's how I voted.
Okay, and then of course the big news that came a couple of days later, or about 24 hours ago now. Just first of all appearing as rumours and then confirmed by the club a little bit later. I think that interesting comment from the club's statement upon the departure of Liam Rosenior was Ajun saying, "It has become evident that our visions for the future are not aligned, and I feel that now is the time to make a change. Our philosophy is clear. We will continue to drive this club forward. And whilst doing so, I will continue to be open and transparent with our fans." Which is interesting, I thought, because I think it was a very similar statement to the one that we put out after Shotter's sacking as well. And I find the comment in there about our philosophy being clear quite interesting, because the only philosophy I can think of that the club has is the one that Rosenior implemented. So if we're saying that we're misaligned as a club and Rosenior, but the philosophy is clear, I'm kind of confused at what that philosophy is that Ajun thinks we have. Unless his suggestion is just that he wants all-out attacking football, and Rosenior didn't want that, and that was the misalignment. But it was just a very confusing statement to me, and a very confusing sacking. And there's been a lot of sort of arguments to and for and against it that have come out over the piece. But I'll get your thoughts first, and we can sort of run through, I guess, a few of the viewpoints, I guess.
Yeah, look, I think when you sort of were in the chat last night, sort of going, have you guys, any of you guys on Twitter, have you seen this? And there was lots of things that were running through my head when you asked that, and Rosenior being sacked was not one of them. So look, it's shocking, it's confusing, and I don't like. I don't know. It just feels like a situation where, like, I've tried to remain fairly level-headed throughout this and not get carried away in any of the directions. And so, but I feel like this is just a situation where there has to be. There's obviously part of this story that we're not getting, because it doesn't. Like, there's just too many elements that just don't make sense. Like, when you go, if you go like, oh well, it's because he didn't make playoffs, and you go like, but he signed a 3-year contract in December or something. Like, he just signed a new contract. And so, because I've seen people suggesting, oh well, there must have, maybe he had a clause where, like, if he didn't get promoted, he was. And I was like, well, then you wouldn't give him a 3-year contract with, like, and put that in it. If that was the thing, if you were going to have that performance KPI where it's playoffs or it's promotion, and you wanted him to extend his deal, then surely you'd go, we'll give you a 12-month deal, we'll extend your deal by 12 months. Here's the conditions. You meet that, we'll give you like this instead or whatever. Then going, here's a 3-year deal, and then sack him, and like, it doesn't make that. So that doesn't make any sense to me. And as you said, the statements, the statements, the sacking statements, the public statements, very, very similar. And so it almost feels like it's just a copy paste job, that he's just got, this in his filing cabinet, and he went, oh, where's my sack
Football
the manager
cliches.
one? Yep.
Yeah.
I think the most ironic thing about it is, the comment about transparency, because we all found out through the media and not from the club itself. And I do understand that, there are the media that have, those journalists and things, they have all their ways, they have their little birdies that slip them some information, and they've got their finger on the pulse. But also, like, if this was planned, like, if Ajun went into that meeting knowing that he was going to sack Rosenior, then that stuff is all ready to go, and it should be going out pretty much straight away, like simultaneously almost, where you just go, there's the door, there's the statement put out, the club has sacked Rosenior, not waiting until it's been broke by the media.
That's a great point. Yeah.
And if it's not that, if he didn't plan to do it going into the meeting, then it's some sort of impetuous, like, decision based on some disagreement in the moment, about, like, at a time when everyone's very emotional come the end of the season, and you go, well, that's not good business sense, or from my perspective, that's not the way that you run a successful business, is letting your emotions dictate you, especially on important, like, big things like that. There are lots of, like, caveats obviously to this, where you could say that Rosenior was backed very heavily in January, was given lots of lots of talented personnel to make his push for playoffs, and he didn't achieve that. And that's a fair point. My counter to that is that yeah, I mean, they could still cost money, but most of those were loans.
Yeah, and I like we sort of said at the time. I think we even probably said in either December or early January that this was a very strong championship where the top four was basically sewn up at that point. We were
Mm,
fighting for one of two playoff places, and we were pretty strong on saying there was not much point in going all out for this
mm,
season. And it's why we praised the signings of Ermer and Panda for the future and saying that we're basically setting up this good basis for next season and a tilt for next season. And, a playoff push this season is a bonus. And Ajun seemed to be saying all the same things. Like he did an interview after Rosenior signed the new deal saying, um, you know, you look at some of the teams in the Premier League and, Sheffield United and Burnley and that they went up too soon. And if we don't go up, then we're not ready. And if we finish 8th or 10th, then that's where we deserve to finish. And we're not going to be impatient and expect to go up this season. And it turns out that he is impatient and he does want that immediate success. And it's an interesting argument because you also mentioned it earlier in the episode, and it's one I wanted to sort of address on. Well, we were 6th heading into January, and we got all these signings coming in, and now we're finishing the season 7th. Like that's going backwards. But season on season, we've gone from 15th to 7th, as Cameron said. I mean, Rosenior came in, and I think we're 21st in the table when he joined the club, and he's basically taken us in 18 months to finishing 7th. And you can't just look at our position in the table of 6th at the start of January in a bubble and ignore the fact that Norwich got Josh Sargent back from a long-term injury where they'd been flying before his injury, crashed when he got injured, and then were flying when he came back. You look at the fact that Delap got injured at the start of January. You look at the fact that Philogene was out for 2 months at that point as well. Seri left to go to AFCON, which sort of coincided with our worst patch of form for the season. And then you're bringing in Zaruri, what was it? Zaruri, Giles, Carvalho, and was that basic? And I guess Omer as well. But so you're basically replacing like a quarter or a third of the starting 11 in a January window where they don't have the preseason, they don't have the fitness base, all that. Ohio showed that you need that fitness base over a bit of time to actually get it placed in the team. Rosenior actually integrated them, brought them into the team, sort of coped with that dip in form and then got us back up and took it to the final day. It's not like we dropped off and finished 10th or 11th, which at one point it looked like we might have completely tailed off. He reinvigorated them and got them back up. So you look at that Ipswich game and you think this is us firing on all cylinders. We've got Delap, we've got Philogene, we've got Carvalho all looking really good. And look how good we look. We're going toe-to-toe with this fantastic team. I just don't buy the argument that, oh, well, he had all this money given to him and he's taken us backwards. I mean, he's taken us forwards in so many ways and so many metrics. And you can't sort of say, well, we missed the playoffs by 3 points when you look at just 2 games in isolation, the 2 games against Watford, we missed 2 penalties, which could have given us an extra 4 points, and say we've basically decided to sack Rosenior on the back of those missed 4 points. Like that's such an arbitrary and an intangible thing to base a sacking off beyond just. It's not like the Stoke performance became the norm and we were not scoring goals and we were and the players were out of form. He's brought Carvalho through and scored 9 goals. Carvalho scored 9 goals. He's integrated and developed Ohio and brought him in, and he scored those 2 goals against Ipswich and Coventry. Like he's got these tangible metrics of improving these players. It just seems like such a bonkers decision to me. And this, so Cameron's saying here, someone has to be lined up. If it's this Tim Walter, who's been sacked by a couple of clubs in 2nd Division Germany, and we're basically saying, let's try and find another Danny Roll and hope lightning strikes twice. I mean, Andre Breitenreiter went into Huddersfield as another, up-and-coming German, cool, savvy manager, and he's gotten them relegated. Like, it's not that easy. I don't know. I've just had a bit of a rant and overtaken you,
no,
but
you're fine. I think it's just very, very silly. I mean, like, I guess this is the thing. We're both, admirers of Rosenior and what he's done, and so it's easy for us to say that it's silly. I mean, there are plenty of City supporters who think that the style of football is boring and whatever. I don't necessarily agree with that, because I just, I mean, there's been games where we didn't play well, and at the the style of play hasn't quite worked. But I think as we've talked, it's progressed really nicely to a point where most of the time we are creating chances from the style of play, which is passing it around deep, inviting the press to then play through and break forward. Lots of people are unhappy with that, and those people are probably quite satisfied with Rosenior sacking, and quite will say that the style of play is a fair justification. That it's not attacking enough, and it's not the attacking football that Ajun wanted. But I think the main thing is, as you were saying, there are tangible things that Rosenior has done in the 18 months that he's been in charge that I don't think it's not fair to just ignore those and throw them away over, as you say, maybe an arbitrary, it's missed penalties, or it's the ball going over the line at Norwich, or whatever else. Something else happened. Was it against Norwich again? Something dumb
Against Norwich,
happened,
the keeper
or
not getting sent off when he knocks out Connolly. Yeah.
There's all sorts of weird things that have happened throughout the season, which you could point to, but like, apart from Delap comes in as a promising striker who's had a series of unsuccessful loan spells where he's scoring 2 or 3 goals, in those spells, getting recalled, sent somewhere else, scoring a couple of goals, and comes in and essentially in half a season gets the close to double figures. Or did he get to double figures?
I think you got 8 or 9. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And you go, well, if he was there for the whole thing, I reckon he probably ends on 15. I think he just,
at least, yeah.
He would have, but an unfortunate injury. Because I think he came back, and what was his second or third appearance from that injury where he scored a goal. So he just So Rosenior, has brought that out of him.
Philogene only got 3 goals last season on loan at Cardiff, and is all of a sudden one of the best players in the championship.
That there are all these young players being brought through, mentored, and improved. And if it's just so mind-boggling. And I mean, I feel like we're never going to get the answers that we want from this situation, which is probably going to be the most frustrating thing. But if because Ishun's already, he basically said we're not going to talk about it until we basically announce the new manager, and then when he's got a new manager, he's just going to say, well, I don't want to talk about the old manager, we've got this new manager here. So it's it's very it's very clever media play by him, which is to be expected. But in terms of that, I think that I've seen lots of comments about that the stuff that he's done, and we shouldn't forget all of that, because he has done an amazing job in a lot of regards. In terms of fan engagement, community engagement, building up the supporter base, stuff around the stadium. He's done a lot of work there, and that should not be discounted because of this one decision. And I don't think we should all just suddenly trash Ajun.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And it's definitely not like the alum. It's not like the alums change the name where you go, okay, that's bridges burned. It's not Adrian out by any means, but it's just being very critical of what is perceived to be a bad decision.
Yeah. But I've seen a few comments around the place that say, of all the trust that he's built up with the fan base, this is a decision that has eroded some of that trust.
I think that's fair.
Which, I think that's fair. But I think I'm just mindful that, we don't I guess, throw the baby out with the bathwater, and just because I think we have, we've had bad owners before, and we've had owners who have made good decisions and bad decisions and everything previously. And I think at the moment, it's sort of one of those things where pretty much up until this point, almost everything's been a really good move. And the only things that quite haven't worked out, or the only 2 questionable decisions realistically, are in terms of the manager. The first one being Avaladze bringing in Shola originally, where we went who is this guy? What experience does he have? Is he any good? and then this most recent decision. And so, like, in the couple of years that he's been like owned the club, to only have like really two decisions where you go, those are odd choices, is overwhelmingly still like a really positive ownership. But yeah, this is a decision that leaves a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth anyway.
I think as well is that it gives me flashbacks to Avaladze's sacking, where even though Shota was not a great manager, it just brings back the memory that, what was it? It was after the international break. It was the morning of the Blackpool game, and we get the news that Shota's been sacked, and you just think that's such odd timing. He must have someone lined up, and we had the whole public courting of I can't even remember his name now, but that manager, the Portuguese manager, who then didn't end up joining.
Corberan?
No. It was
the other one.
Yeah, I forget what his name is, but you ended up wanting too much money, I think. And then we went basically a month with Dawson in charge, and then we got Rosenior, and you just think it seemed like such an impulsive decision. Like, you've had all the international break to do this, and you're doing it the morning of the game. With this one with Rosenior, as you sort of said a little while ago, like, to do it so soon after the end of the season feels like there must have been some sort of clause in Rosenior's deal. But then you look at Rosenior's attitude and his comments in the interviews after the game, and his apparently he was, lining up sort of meetings with fans and stuff like that over the next few weeks. And it's like, there was no way that Rosenior knew this was coming. He might have known that his job was, on the line. He might have known that, that he had a bit to prove and that he'd let Ajun down. But to think that he was going to get sacked, especially this early in the off season, I think would have taken him by surprise. And it's interesting because it does mean that now both managerial appointments by Ajun have come off quite poorly, in the sense that we've had obviously Shota not working out, and then Rosenior being so popular, but a pretty inexperienced manager. And I think if you're going to appoint an inexperienced manager, you have to show a bit of patience. And I look at it's funny because Ajun took over the club at a pretty similar time to Bowley taking over at Chelsea. And I look at the two and kind of think of them as running in parallel, where Bowley sort of played football manager and signed all these players and did all this, splashed all this cash. And Ajun very much did the same thing for us. And Bowley brought in Potter and said, he's a project manager. We're going to show him patience. We're not going to sack him no matter what. And they sacked him when they were, down in 15th or whatever it was. And I think if Rosenior had us this season down in like 15th, 16th, that's a completely different story. And you think, yeah, okay, that's fair enough. But Rosenior was showing the progress. And you think, this is a project. He's showing progress. It's a bit of patience. You've got a, solid foundation. You give him a bit more funds in the summer, get some more players in, and you have a real crack at the automatics. But now it almost feels like the next manager, it's automatics or bust, because what's the point of changing managers if you're not kind of aiming to go that one step, that step higher? Because Rosenior would have been aiming for the playoffs no matter what, potentially automatics. But now it's like, well, if that wasn't good enough, then clearly we need someone to be going even higher. So it's just one that sort of, I just don't really get. And look, we could have a manager come in the next week or two, and it could completely change our mind. And we go, look, and players start getting signed, and you go, okay, like, let's see how this goes. It could be all right. But like the comment you said about this sort of eroding some of the trust in Ajun, I think it just puts a lot of pressure on that next decision, because you go, well, we've had these two managers now not really work out. It's really on Ajun to get this next one right, because otherwise you start to question, well, is his judgment sound with this sort of stuff? Because, he's brought in Dogan Cynic and those guys as well, which reportedly, that was part of the issue as well. I think it was Baz Cooper or someone saying part of the issue was Rosenior not playing Cynic and Panda and those guys. And you think, well, Cynic was never fit. Panda I kind of get, but I also just think while you're in with a chance at the playoffs, you don't really, yes, also I've had a few poor games, but I don't know if you really risk changing the keeper at that point of the season. It's just, it comes off as very emotional. That's all. Like you said, it comes off as a very emotional decision, when I think it's the sort of thing where you give it a week, you let the dust settle on the season, and then make a decision.
Yeah, I guess the only the only, I guess, like, good thing is that it happened so soon. which gives us lots of time to sort everything out. We're not going into the next season with a in the what was it, the 14-15 season, was it?
with Bruce,
With
yeah.
Bruce, yeah, where he just sort of where it was like a week before the season started, and he was like, "Yeah, no, I'm out of here." We had to just appoint the assistant as on as the manager. So at least it's not that, but yeah, not the best.
I saw Cameron's comment in the chat as well, and this is sort of branching into the transfer news, which we won't talk transfers too much. We'll probably talk that a bit more in our review episode a bit later on. But there's also this sort of element to it as well, where you look at the fact that, so Cameron's question saying, how do you think the sacking of Rosenior affects the loan market for Hull now? And you do look at the fact that players are always going to say, "Oh, I'm signing because I love the manager, and I signing because the manager talked me into it," and all that sort of thing. But we sort of touched on already. You look at the tangible improvements in your Delaps, your Carvalho, your Morden. Giles probably the only one that hasn't really looked that great. Ohio even looked good after a spell working on his fitness and tactics and all that sort of thing. And you sort of think, are players still going to look at us and say, well, yeah, I want to join Hull because they had all this great work with all these players last season, when they go, well, that manager's not there anymore?
Yeah, I think there's two sides or two parts that I'll touch on, and one with that, like the loan thing. I think I was actually really looking forward to next season, going, well, we now have going to have a good relationship with Liverpool. We took a couple of your players, they came, we improved them, we got them performing well. They're now like assets. Man City, now Delap's got a $10 million price tag or something on him. And they're not necessarily like, I don't necessarily see it as a like they want to get rid of him, but they're like, well, now there's interest, so here's what it's going to cost. And 10 million for essentially who's been a lone player. I think I read he's made 6 starts or appearances for Man City or something in like cup games and whatever. So he's like 10 million's a decent fee for like, and he wouldn't have got that 12 months ago. And that's that's the thing. Who 12 months ago played in 2 clubs in the championship in the one season, and got 5 goals or something across the year. So I think that does, Rosenior's sacking is going to have an impact on some of the deals that we can do. Just because I think having that, as we already mentioned, the tangible metrics to be able to say like, well, what we can do, what sort of football we're going to play, and that, I think that's why.
I think that's even if we bring in a good manager, they don't have that evidence of the style of
Yeah,
football.
I think it's why, under Bruce, we seem to have a really good relationship with like Arsenal. We seem to get a lot of, young Arsenal loanees at the time for whatever reason. I just feel like I remember a few, and it just is that relationship where you go, if they come in, they know who the manager is, they know what they're about, they know the style of football, they know like it's a move that's going to suit them, or it's going to like teach them something that the parent club thinks they're missing. And yeah, you don't have that familiarity when we change managers. I guess the other side is that if, seeing as Ajun is keeping his cards so close to his chest on the reasons behind Rosenior's sacking, if I was another manager and, this job was available, or I was approached, or I, put my hand up, I feel like I'd be a little bit concerned about, if I got offered a 3-year contract, and I get like the contracts are torn up and things like all paid out and whatever all the time, because like on results, and I get that, like if you sign a 3-year contract and you perform shit and you don't get, and you get your team relegated and you get sacked, that at least makes sense. We go, well, you haven't met your like thing. But to go, even if you perform well, you might have your contract torn up. That doesn't scream security to me as as someone who might want to come to that club. So I think it actually potentially even limits like who's going to want to apply. And I know like managers are going to back themselves. Managers are going
Yeah.
to back themselves to be able to get results, but still, surely, like, especially if you're targeting like someone like if it's a German manager or whatever, and you're like, you have to move to another country to take this job, and they're going to go, that's a lot of effort if the last guy got you to 7th and got sacked. So if I don't get above 7th, you're gonna sack me.
And look, and managers might still do it, but what it probably means, and players might still come, but what it probably means is that we're going to be paying them a lot more money to incentivize them to come, because a manager might say, well, like you look at Watford, for example, they don't really have trouble finding managers really, despite their sacking record. But that's probably because they just give managers such big salaries, and the managers just go, oh, it's a 6-month job, and then I'll get my payout, and then I'll move on to the next one. And I look at the fact that Carvalho reportedly only cost us 500 grand all up, and we beat out a Leeds and a Southampton to get him. And you think that could very well be because he saw us as a better project with Rosenior as manager. Now, with another manager, you hypothetically might still get Carvalho to come, but it might mean that it costs you $1 million, 1.5 million to entice him to come, because it might take that extra money to say, well, actually, yeah, this is why you should pick us over one of those better clubs. The other point, your point on the managers as well, which I've sort of said a few places, but I can't help but look at a club like a Middlesbrough or a Coventry, who were both in the playoffs last season and held on to their manager. Well, as of now, I haven't checked Twitter today. Maybe they're going to follow suit, but as of now, they've held on to Carrick and Mark Robbins, who, despite taking the playoffs last season, failed to make the playoffs this season. And not only that, but Coventry spent a lot of money on Hadji Wright and Ellis Sims. Middlesbrough, granted, didn't spend as much. They sold Akpom for a big fee, and they got in Latte Lath, who's looking great, and really developed over the course of the season. But you look at Corberán and Wagner in the playoffs this season, who missed playoffs last season, and their clubs didn't sack them, and they backed them, and they brought in a couple of players and bolstered the squads and made the playoffs. And I just, you look at a Birmingham sacking Eustace, you look at a Sunderland sacking Mowbray, you look at Stoke constantly bringing in, Alex Neil or Gary Rowett and all those sorts of managers where you go, they brought in experienced manager after experienced manager and failed to do anything. It just feels like if you're onto a good thing with a manager, I hate the phrase "be careful what you wish for," because I just feel like it's such a disincentive to, push the boat out and try. But it just feels like it's, the grass isn't always greener is maybe a better expression to use. Like, we had Rosenior, we knew what we had, we knew that he was delivering. Yes, there were games where we didn't play well, but every team's going to have games where they don't play well. Maresca was called boring by Leicester fans, and he still took them up in first place. Like, you can improve enough in other areas and bolster the squad. You can have a bit more consistency. Like, we have a very young squad as well. Like, you get a bit more consistency into them, and it doesn't take, like we said, we missed out on playoffs by a couple of missed penalties and, ball going out. Like, there's so many little intangible things. Get a bit of luck next season, things fall your way. You sign a couple of extra players who hit the ground running, and all of a sudden you're sitting there in 4th next season, and you go, geez, it didn't actually take much to improve on where we were last season. But now it's like, well, new manager comes in, we don't know what style they're going to play, we don't know what players they're going to want. All these other players leaving, and the manager won't even know the squad. He won't know what he wants, what he, if he walks in the door tomorrow and he goes, okay, well, Regan Slater, 50 grand from Sheffield United, has, central midfielder, but, we've got better central midfielders. I don't really need him. Let's just move him on. They don't necessarily recognize the qualities in the players that they've got. Louis Coyle, he's a bit limited. He's a bit too slow. I don't want him. Let's move him on as well. You kind of feel like you're starting from ground zero again.
Yeah. It is a weird one. I guess, yeah. But I guess in terms of managers and stuff, I guess like it's not the same. Obviously, Premier League to Championship, but like you look at the clubs who have held on to their managers, and sure, you can argue about the caliber of managers they have or whatever, but those clubs who have held on to their managers and trusted in the process they put in place or whatever have been reasonably consistently competitive, right? So you look at Man City, who's Guardiola's been there for what feels like a million years now. Like Liverpool, obviously, like Klopp's about to leave, but been there for a long time, and Liverpool's been competitive and successful while he's been there. Arsenal is now getting to that point now with Arteta there for a few years few seasons in charge. And you look at our own like most successful period where we had the one manager, where we had Steve Bruce across like what was 4 or 5 years, and I just feel like I know that like the results business and all of the like football cliches, but I think there's something that I just don't think that the stability that can come with like sticking with a manager is something that can be understated, or maybe it's or something that's undervalued by lots of people, and maybe it's something you can't afford in the championship. Maybe you can afford that stability, or can afford to risk to keep that stability in the Premier League with so much more money or whatever. And maybe it's just that Liverpool, Arsenal, Man City have massive amounts of money and can afford that risk anyway or something. But I just feel like, yeah, I'm just saying the same stuff over and over, that I'm disappointed in the decision and that I really wished Rosenior would have had another full season in charge. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm just having a quick look on Twitter. While we've been talking, Ajun's apparently been on TalkSport and other places sort of clarifying the reasons for the sacking. As it's funnily enough, like as not being because of the league position. So I thought for what we were saying about, a couple of results here or there, maybe it's other stuff, saying it's actually the style of football that that didn't align, that basically it was not what was the quote here from David Burns, saying because his style didn't suit the club and provide the attacking, entertaining football that he wanted. And as a few other people saying, it's the idea that Ajun, who has zero football pedigree of any description, doesn't personally like the style of play and is therefore sacking the manager is a bit crazy. But I guess like we'll sort of round things out maybe with this sort of as a closing point. But I guess if that is the idea that it's the style of play that's the issue, we've known what Rosenior's been about almost since he walked through the door. Like the first thing he did was strengthen the defense. Yes, he then talked about getting the attacking football coming, and we've just seen like a great entertaining 3-3 draw with Ipswich. Like I struggle to sort of understand, like, and that's where I think we kind of go back to the point about this manager from Germany. If we're bringing someone in who's just going to be all out attack and it's just going to be Schotter again, it's a bit of a concerning road to go down if we're going to have an owner essentially identifying players that he wants, identifying the style of play, and basically playing it as almost like a football manager. It's like if you're the owner, you put the money in, you get the people in the roles who actually know what they're doing, and you let them do it. And that's what we seem to have with Rosenior. Rosenior was getting he was improving fitness standards, he was improving the transfer targets, he was looking at improving the pitch, all those sorts of things to get the team playing better. Who has a lot more knowledge and experience in the game than Ajun. But yeah, maybe closing thoughts, concerns, or thoughts on that supposedly being the reason.
I just have my only thing is I just have a general distaste for the attacking style, or I guess not so much in his, but in a general sense, criticisms of like a particular formation being defensive or attacking or whatever, because I think it's really about like what you do with the ball. And I find the style of play that we have very entertaining. So I don't really understand that. I think it's more entertaining than just hoofing it upfield and just playing long balls in behind and having someone like just run in behind defense and try and like chip the keeper or whatever. I just think like the way that the game has evolved over time and the physicality and the skill that the players have now, I just don't know. I just don't understand. Like, I just don't know what they want. Because even like if you go like all out attacking and you go, okay, well, probably the most prominent example at the moment is like Ange Ball or whatever at Spurs, and
They're flying at the moment, aren't they?
they were flying for a little while. The wheels have, I don't necessarily think they've fallen off, but they're in a bit of a like form slump at the moment. But the thing has been with that all-out attacking where it doesn't seem like it's very balanced between attack and defense. That they've been found that that they've been exposed in that, and I think generally, apart from, as you said, there's only a few games where we've like copped like loads of goals. Like was it the Stoke, and then I guess there was the early Chef Wednesday game was like 4-2 or something. So we copped a couple there.
So obviously we had the, what was it? The 3-0 loss to Ipswich is probably the one that stands out. But I don't think we've shipped more than 3 goals in any game this season.
It's like, I just don't really get.
And Cameron just saying, does it read like he feels like the team's more an entertainment engine rather than a successful sports club? And maybe it does. It comes back to, I think one of the famous quotes from when he first came in was he'd rather lose 4-3 than win 1-0, or maybe something worse to that effect, or whatever it was. And it's like, well, it's not really how football works, but okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I just have a general. I just think like.
And it's like I said before, like Leicester fans were bored by Maresca, and they've just finished first in the league. Like,
yeah, and I think it's one of those things again. Like, if we'd had the season we had this year in another season where you didn't have Leicester and we had Leicester, Ipswich, Leeds, and Southampton, who all were extremely dominant. I think they finished like 10 or 12 points or something higher than like West Brom and Norwich. So
the first season where sides finished over 90 points and not got automatic promotion.
And you go in any other season without that sort of level of insanity at the top, in the top 6, we probably make the top 6. We were that close, and we almost made it anyway. But in another season, in a more, I mean, not that there's ever a normal season in the championship, but in a more normal season, that what we achieved this year probably is enough to do that. And you go, well, I go, if it's style of play, if that's the criticism that we weren't playing an attacking enough brand of football, so does that mean this decision still happens even if
we make the playoffs?
We make the playoffs and we get promoted. So we get promoted, and he goes, "Nah, it's not attacking enough. Sorry, guys. Sorry, Rosie, you're out." I just don't buy that. I think it's a convenient excuse. It's a convenient thing that he's a smart man. He knows what's going on in the media. I'm sure he knows, what what people are complaining about, and there is admittedly lots of people complaining about the style of play and it being boring. And I'm sure that this is a convenient excuse for lots to just get half of the fan base to go, yeah, okay, yeah, I understand that.
Yeah. If it's a style of play thing, why? And also, if we've gone so all in on the playoffs this season with some of these signings, why not make the change at the start of March when we had that 3-week period without a game? If you're saying, doesn't matter how we finish the season, I don't want Rosenior's style of play. You know that you don't want him at the end of the season. Why not make the change at the start of that 3-week period? You've got basically a mini preseason with a new manager.
Why offer him a 3-year contract if you don't like his style of play? There's just too much that just doesn't add up with that excuse.
But he's being transparent, Dan.
Final thoughts are, in this moment, in this situation, Ajun's full of shit.
Yeah.
As much as I approve everything, like a lot of the stuff,
he's a marketing man.
Still a supporter. There's very much the media spin. This media spin on this whole deal.
Yeah.
So,
and look, and to balance that a little bit, because I do somewhat agree. Clearly, to balance that somewhat, I think, as I sort of said earlier in the episode, I think there's a lot of pressure now, a lot of expectation on who the next manager is and how they start next season. Because I think if it's anything other than maybe automatics is too aggressive, but maybe if it's anything other than clear top six form, I think there's going to be a lot of heat starting to go onto it. Like this is, it's gone from being, is it the players not being good enough to, is it the manager not being good enough to, if we start next season poorly as well, I think it becomes Arjun needs to sort this out. He needs to get, whether it's that Tan needs to take more control, whether we need someone better than Tan in place to basically not be just a yes man to Arjun, but to say, no, this is what the club needs. This is what we need to do. You don't want to waste your money. Get someone in who can actually use it efficiently and properly. So I think there's a lot riding on this off season. Reports are that they're going to try and have a manager in place in the next couple of weeks. Maybe it'll be before our review episode next week. We shall see. But what I thought was going to be, a nice quick 10, 15-minute episode reviewing the Plymouth game very quickly ballooned out into a much more significant discussion. So look, thank you for joining me for this one, Dan, despite the ill health.
Yeah, look, it's fine. I guess, yeah. I mean, yeah, as you say, decision could be vindicated with the next managerial appointment in the next 12 months. And so this might all be a moot point anyway. And we could be in the Premier League in 12 months' time.
And if we are, I'm absolutely clipping out the Arjun is full of shit and playing it over and over as we celebrate promotion. No doubts at all. But look, thank you everyone else for listening in as well. We will be back next week. I say somewhat confidently, probably next week, to do our season review episode where we'll crown our player of the season and maybe have a bit more fallout on this decision and talk a bit about signings as well. But until next week, come on, City.